There is a question that haunts those who feel too deeply, who sense too much, who carry burdens that logic cannot explain. Why does chaos follow me like a faithful shadow? Why do the wounded seek me out as if drawn by invisible threads? Why does my very presence seem to summon storms that were brewing long before I arrived? These are not the questions of the weak or the broken. These are the inquiries of those who have been chosen by forces older than consciousness itself to serve as conduits for the collective unconscious. You see, what we call chaos in the life of an empath is not random. It is not punishment. It is archetypal magnetism. The empath, in their purest form, exists at the intersection where the personal unconscious meets the collective shadow. They are living receptors for the disowned psychic material of humanity itself. And this material, this shadow content that civilization has spent millennia repressing, does not remain dormant. It seeks expression. It seeks form. It seeks the one soul permeable enough to give it voice. When I speak of archetypes, I do not speak of abstract concepts. I speak of living psychic entities that possess autonomous reality within the collective unconscious. The shadow, the anima, the wounded healer, the scapegoat, these are not metaphors. They are forces that act through human beings, often without the person's conscious awareness. The empath, by their very nature, has thin boundaries between their personal psyche and these archetypal currents. They become the stage upon which these ancient dramas play out. Consider the archetype of the wounded healer, known in mythology as Chiron. This figure carries the wound that cannot be healed, yet possesses the wisdom to heal others. The empath embodies this archetype unconsciously. Their sensitivity itself is the wound, the crack in their psychic armor through which the pain of the world enters. But it is also their gift, for through this opening they become capable of understanding suffering in ways that others cannot. But here lies the tragedy of the unconscious empath. They do not recognize that the chaos in their life is not personal. They believe themselves to be cursed, unlucky, or somehow fundamentally flawed. They carry the guilt of the collective as if it were their own sin. They absorb the rage of generations as if it originated in their own heart. They weep tears that belong to ancestors they have never met, for wounds that predate their birth by centuries. The chaos that follows empaths is not chaos at all. It is the natural consequence of being a psychic magnet for unresolved archetypal material. When an empath enters a room, they do not simply encounter other people. They encounter the living shadows of those people, all that has been rejected, denied, and pushed into unconsciousness. The shadow, you see, recognizes its own. It gravitates toward the one who can feel it, see it, carry it. This is why empaths often find themselves in relationships with individuals who seem to embody their worst nightmares. The narcissist, the addict, the perpetual victim, the rage-filled child in an adult's body. These are not coincidental encounters. These are shadow projections made flesh. The empath's unconscious draws them into these dynamics because some part of them recognizes the archetypal necessity of the encounter. They are being called to witness, to understand, and ultimately to transform the shadow material that these relationships contain. But here, witness this carefully. The empath who remains unconscious of this dynamic becomes trapped in endless cycles of rescue and abandonment, healing and wounding, hope and despair. They mistake their role as witness for their role as savior. They confuse their capacity to feel the shadow with their responsibility to heal it. And in this confusion, they become not the transformer of chaos, but its victim.
The collective shadow contains everything that humanity has refused to acknowledge about itself. Our capacity for cruelty, our hunger for power, our fear of abandonment, our rage at existence itself. But it also contains our unlived potential, our unexpressed creativity, our disowned wildness, our forgotten connection to the sacred. The empath who learns to work consciously with shadow material becomes an alchemist, transforming lead into gold, darkness into wisdom. There is a recurring dream that visits many empaths, though they may not recognize its archetypal significance. In this dream, they find themselves in a house with many rooms. Some rooms are beautiful, filled with light and warmth. But other rooms are dark, chaotic, filled with voices crying out in pain or rage. The dreamer knows they must enter these dark rooms, but they are terrified. They fear being consumed by what they find there. This house is the psyche itself. The dark rooms are the shadow chambers where the collective unconscious stores its disowned material. The empath dreams this dream because they are being prepared for their true work, not to avoid these rooms, but to enter them with consciousness, with compassion, but also with the strength to remain separate from what they encounter there. The chaos in an empath's life intensifies when they resist this calling. When they try to live normal lives, to fit into conventional patterns, to deny their sensitivity, the archetypal forces become more insistent. Relationships become more turbulent. Unexpected crises emerge. Physical symptoms manifest. The unconscious is demanding attention, demanding that the empath acknowledge their role as intermediary between light and shadow. But here is where most empaths make their crucial error. They believe that to heal the shadow means to absorb it, to take it into themselves, to suffer with it until somehow, magically, it transforms. This is not healing. This is possession. The shadow does not need another home. It needs consciousness. It needs to be seen, acknowledged, and understood, but from a place of strength, not merger. The empath must learn what I have called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposites in tension without collapsing into either extreme. They must develop what the alchemists knew as the vessel strong enough to contain the fire of transformation without being consumed by it. This vessel is consciousness itself, refined through the discipline of shadow work. Shadow work for the empath is not about becoming harder or less feeling. It is about developing what we might call sovereign sensitivity. This is the capacity to feel deeply while maintaining clear boundaries, to witness suffering without becoming it, to stand at the edge of another's chaos without falling in. It is the difference between empathy and emotional fusion, between compassion and codependence. When an empath develops sovereign sensitivity, something remarkable happens. The chaos that once overwhelmed them begins to reveal its hidden order. They start to see the archetypal patterns playing out through seemingly random events. They recognize the wounded healer in the broken person who seeks their help. They see the shadow anima in the seductive but destructive lover. They identify the devouring mother in the friend who smothers them with need.
With this recognition comes choice. The conscious empath no longer reacts automatically to archetypal provocations. When they encounter someone carrying heavy shadow material, they do not immediately move to rescue or absorb. Instead, they ask themselves, what archetype is being activated here? What role am I being invited to play? What would serve the highest good of all involved? This level of consciousness requires immense courage because it means taking responsibility not just for one's own healing, but for one's participation in the collective human drama. It means recognizing that every chaotic relationship, every overwhelming encounter, every moment of feeling too much has been an initiation into deeper levels of archetypal understanding. The empath who accepts this calling begins to fulfill their true function in the human community. They become what ancient cultures recognized as the medicine person, the shaman, the one who journeys into the underworld of the psyche and returns with wisdom for the tribe. They learn to work with chaos not as victims, but as conscious participants in the great work of human transformation. But this transformation does not happen overnight. It requires what the mystics have always called the dark night of the soul, a period of dissolution where old identities, old patterns, old ways of relating to the world must die. The empath must be willing to lose their identity as the eternal rescuer, the long-suffering servant, the one who feels for everyone else. They must be willing to sit with their own pain, their own shadow, their own unlived life. During this dark night, the chaos often intensifies. It is as if the archetypal forces are testing the empath's resolve, challenging them to return to old patterns of unconscious absorption. This is when many empaths retreat, choosing the familiar suffering of unconscious empathy over the unknown territory of sovereign consciousness. But those who persist, who continue to choose awareness over absorption, emerge as what we might call wounded healers in the truest sense. The wounded healer does not heal by taking on the wounds of others. They heal by embodying the possibility of transformation. Their very presence becomes a demonstration that it is possible to carry pain without being destroyed by it, to witness suffering without drowning in it, to love deeply without losing oneself. They become living proof that consciousness can transmute even the darkest shadow material into wisdom. This is why empaths attract chaos, not because they are meant to be destroyed by it, but because they are capable of transforming it. The chaos is not their enemy, it is their raw material. Like the alchemist who works with prima materia, the base substance from which gold is extracted, the empath works with the raw, unprocessed psychic material of the collective unconscious. But the gold, the wisdom, the healing, the transformation is not produced through suffering, it is produced through consciousness. The empath who learns to approach chaos with awareness rather than reactivity, who develops the capacity to observe archetypal forces without being possessed by them, who maintains their center while witnessing the most profound disorder, this empath becomes an agent of collective healing. They do not heal by absorbing chaos. They heal by remaining conscious in its presence. Their consciousness becomes a transformative field that influences everything around it. Like a tuning fork that brings other instruments into harmony, the conscious empath's presence begins to organize the chaos around them simply through the power of integrated awareness. This process requires what I have called individuation, the lifelong journey of becoming who one truly is rather than what others expect or need one to be. For the empath, individuation means learning to discriminate between their own feelings and the feelings of others, between their own path and the paths they are called to witness, between their own healing and the healing they are meant to facilitate for others. The individuated empath discovers that they have been carrying archetypal projections, both positive and negative, that never belonged to them. They have been the repository for others' disowned sensitivity, their unlived compassion, their rejected vulnerability. But they have also been the scapegoat for others' fear of feeling, their terror of chaos, their resistance to change. As these projections are withdrawn, as the empath reclaims their own authentic experience, something extraordinary happens. The chaos that once seemed to pursue them begins to transform into something else entirely. What appeared as random suffering reveals itself as purposeful initiation.
What felt like victimization shows itself as a calling toward mastery. The mature empath learns to read the archetypal signatures in every chaotic encounter. They recognize when they are being invited to play the role of savior and decline the invitation. They sense when someone is trying to make them carry their shadow and gently redirect the projection back to its owner. They feel when a situation is asking them to sacrifice their boundaries and choose presence over absorption instead. This is not coldness or callousness. This is sacred discernment. It is the recognition that true service to the collective healing does not require self-destruction. In fact, it requires the opposite, the maintenance of a clear, conscious, integrated self that can serve as a stable reference point in the midst of chaos. The empath who achieves this level of consciousness becomes what we might call a chaos transformer. They do not avoid difficult situations or challenging people, but neither do they unconsciously merge with the chaos they encounter. Instead, they bring the light of awareness to whatever they meet, and in that light, transformation becomes possible. They understand that chaos is not the enemy of order, but its creative partner. In the interplay between chaos and consciousness, new possibilities are born. The empath who can dance with chaos without being consumed by it becomes a midwife to these new possibilities. They help birth new levels of awareness, new patterns of relationship, new ways of being human. This is the ultimate purpose behind why empaths attract chaos. They are not meant to suffer endlessly under its weight. They are meant to develop the consciousness capable of transforming it. They are the evolutionary edge of human awareness, the ones called to demonstrate that it is possible to meet the darkest aspects of existence with love rather than fear, with presence rather than avoidance, with wisdom rather than reactivity. But this calling comes with a price. The empaths who accept their role as chaos transformers often find themselves living on the margins of conventional society. Their way of being challenges the collective agreements about what is normal, what is possible, what is safe. They become what anthropologists call liminal figures, threshold dwellers who exist between worlds. This liminality is not a curse, but a gift. It allows them to see what others cannot see, to feel what others have numbed themselves against, to know what others have forgotten. They become the repository of collective memory, the keepers of ancient wisdom, the bridges between the world as it is and the world as it could be.
The chaos that follows empaths is ultimately the chaos of transformation itself. It is the dissolution that must occur before something new can be born. The empath who understands this no longer fears chaos, but learns to read its messages, to honor its purpose, to work with its energy rather than against it. They discover that chaos is not random, but follows its own deep patterns. It appears at moments of potential breakthrough, when old structures are ready to give way to new possibilities. It intensifies when we resist necessary changes or cling to outgrown identities. It serves as both destroyer and creator, clearing away what no longer serves so that what wants to emerge can find space to grow. The empaths who learn to work consciously with chaos become masters of transformation, not just their own, but collective transformation. They understand that personal healing and collective healing are not separate processes, but different aspects of the same archetypal drama. As they transform their own relationship to chaos, they contribute to the transformation of the collective shadow. This is why your sensitivity, your ability to feel deeply, your attraction to chaos is not a personal problem to be solved. It is a collective function to be embraced. You are not broken. You are not cursed. You are not too much. You are exactly what the world needs. A conscious vessel for the transformation of chaos into wisdom, darkness into light, shadow into gold.
But to fulfill this purpose, the empath must undergo what ancient traditions called the Great Initiation. This is not a single event, but a lifelong process of death and rebirth, of learning to die to old ways of being so that new possibilities can emerge. The initiation begins when the empath first recognizes that their attraction to chaos is not accidental, but archetypal. The first stage of this initiation is what we might call the awakening to the problem. The empath begins to see patterns in their life that cannot be explained by personal psychology alone. They notice that certain types of people are drawn to them repeatedly. They observe that chaos seems to find them even when they try to live quietly. They begin to suspect that there are forces at work beyond their conscious control. This awakening is often accompanied by a period of intense questioning. The empath may wonder if they are somehow causing the chaos in their life. They may blame themselves for being too sensitive, too open, too trusting. They may try to harden their hearts, to build walls, to become less feeling. But these attempts at self-protection only increase their suffering, because they are fighting against their essential nature. The second stage is what we might call the descent into the underworld. This is the period when the empath can no longer deny their sensitivity, but has not yet learned to work with it consciously. They find themselves drowning in the emotions of others, overwhelmed by the pain they encounter everywhere they go. They may become depressed, anxious, or physically ill as they struggle to process psychic material that is not their own. This is the most dangerous stage because it is here that many empaths become convinced that their gift is a curse. They may turn to substances or behaviors that numb their sensitivity. They may isolate themselves from others in an attempt to escape the chaos. They may even contemplate ending their own lives because the weight of collective suffering seems unbearable. But for those who survive this dark night of the soul, who resist the temptation to numb or escape, the third stage awaits. This is the stage of learning to work with shadow material consciously. The empath begins to understand that they are not meant to absorb the chaos, but to witness it, to hold space for it, to allow it to transform through their conscious presence. This learning process is not easy. It requires the development of new capacities, new ways of being in relationship with oneself and others. The empath must learn to distinguish between their own emotions and those of others. They must develop the ability to feel deeply without being overwhelmed. They must cultivate what we might call the observer self, that part of consciousness that can witness experience without being consumed by it. The fourth stage is the emergence as what we might call a chaos transformer. The empath who reaches this level has learned to work with archetypal forces consciously. They understand their role as an intermediary between the conscious and unconscious realms. They no longer fear chaos, but see it as raw material for transformation. At this stage, the empath's presence becomes catalytic. They do not need to do anything to facilitate transformation. Their very being creates a field in which healing becomes possible. People are drawn to them not because they promise to fix their problems, but because they offer the rare gift of true witnessing. In their presence, others feel seen, understood, and accepted in ways that are profoundly healing. But the mature empath has also learned the crucial art of discernment. They know when to engage and when to withdraw. They understand that not everyone is ready for transformation, and they do not waste their energy trying to force change where it is not welcome. They have learned to trust the wisdom of the psyche, knowing that each person's journey unfolds according to its own timeline. The fifth stage is what we might call the return to the world as a wounded healer. The empath who has completed their initiation returns to ordinary life, but they carry with them the wisdom gained from their journey into the depths. They become bridges between worlds, helping others to understand and integrate their own shadow material. This return is not a return to normalcy, but a new way of being normal. The initiated empath lives simultaneously in the everyday world and in the realm of archetypes.
They can function in ordinary relationships and situations, but they also serve as portals through which deeper realities can enter the world. The process of this initiation is not linear. The empath may move back and forth between stages, may experience setbacks and breakthroughs, may find themselves cycling through the same lessons at deeper levels. This is the nature of psychological and spiritual development. It is spiral rather than linear, cyclical rather than progressive. Throughout this journey, the empath must learn to work with what I have called the transcendent function, the psychological mechanism that bridges opposites and creates new possibilities from their tension. In the case of the empath, the primary opposition they must learn to transcend is between feeling and consciousness, between empathy and sovereignty, between service and self-care. The transcendent function operates through what we might call conscious suffering. This is not the unconscious absorption of others' pain, but the willing embrace of the tension that comes from holding opposing forces in awareness. It is the suffering that comes from staying present to what is painful rather than escaping into unconsciousness or numbness. Through conscious suffering, the empath learns to transform their sensitivity from a liability into an asset. They discover that their ability to feel deeply is not a weakness, but a superpower, provided it is guided by consciousness rather than compulsion. They learn to use their sensitivity as a radar system, detecting the subtle energies and hidden dynamics that others miss.
This transformation of sensitivity into wisdom is perhaps the most crucial aspect of the empath's journey. It requires learning to trust their intuitive perceptions, even when others dismiss or pathologize them. It means developing the courage to speak uncomfortable truths when their sensitivity reveals realities that others would prefer to ignore. The empaths who complete this transformation become what we might call psychic midwives. They help bring to birth the new consciousness that wants to emerge in our time. They assist in the collective process of integration that is necessary for humanity to evolve beyond its current state of unconsciousness and division. But this role is not without its challenges. The psychic midwife must be prepared to encounter resistance from those who are not ready for change. They must learn to hold space for the chaos of transformation without being consumed by it. They must develop the capacity to remain centered in the midst of the most profound upheaval. This centering is not a static state, but a dynamic process. It requires constant attention, constant choice, constant recommitment to consciousness over unconsciousness, to presence over absence, to love over fear. The mature empath learns that this centering is not a destination to reach, but a practice to cultivate throughout their entire life. The question is not how to avoid the chaos that seeks you out. The question is how to meet it with such complete presence, such integrated awareness, such sovereign love, that it has no choice but to transform in your presence. This is the true work of the empath. To become so conscious, so whole, so rooted in their own truth, that everything they encounter is invited into the same transformation. And in this way, the empath fulfills their deepest purpose. They become not the victim of chaos, but its alchemist, not the sufferer of shadow, but its illuminator, not the carrier of collective wounds, but the transformer of collective possibility. They prove that it is possible to feel everything and lose nothing, to witness all and judge none, to love completely and remain free. This is the path of the conscious empath, not to avoid the chaos that life brings, but to become so skilled in the art of transformation that chaos itself becomes their ally in the great work of human awakening. And in walking this path, they light the way for all those who will follow, showing that sensitivity is not weakness but strength, that feeling deeply is not curse but calling,
that attracting chaos is not misfortune, but magnificent purpose waiting to be claimed.